This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So, any questions, guys, before we get started? So, on Friday's class, we were looking at traffic managers, right? So, we did traffic manager. We understood what are the different routing methodologies of a traffic manager out there. So, any questions there? Anyone, any questions before I can get started today? Anyone, any questions that I can, any questions that I can take?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Uh, Sir, I have a few doubts.
Good,
Uh,
please.
Sir, actually, when you go with weighted traffic routing methodology,
Okay.
sir, we can give weighted weight like up to from 1 to 1,000, like 2, 3, 4 something.
Mhm.
So based
Correct.
on higher weight, then higher priority will be there, right?
Yes.
And when coming to the default weighted means that means almost it will take by default one as a default weightage, right? When you want
Hmm.
to give some this.
Yes.
So in this time, how traffic manager will divert the divert the traffic across these regions? If some region is there east to west, some region is north Europe, something
Hmm.
is that. How it's going to divert the traffic?
So, in this case, traffic manager is going to act more like a load balancer. It will make sure that the equal amount of requests is going to the endpoints which have equal amount of weight. Meaning you have an endpoint with a weight called 1, you have another endpoint with a weight called 2.
Mhm.
Out of 3 requests, 2 requests are going to the endpoint with your weight called 2. One request are going to the endpoint with the weight called 1. So it's just based upon, so for example, 2 plus 1 is 3. That is the 100% of, let's say, weightage that you have declared, out of which
Okay.
1 is to 2 ratio. It's going to take that particular ratio, telling that, okay, fine, if one request is going to first endpoint, two requests should go to the second endpoint out there as such. So it'll just take the weight out there and just send the request to, let's say, your endpoints out there as such.
That means if the both endpoints having the same weightage also,
Then it'll be a 50-50, 1 is to 1 ratio.
that will decide by automatically decided by traffic manager only.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, okay. And one thing, sir, when coming to the geographic,
Mm-hmm.
sir, I've tried using. Sorry, I'm getting some kind of errors. How to choose the regional grouping and country? Should I
Firstly,
choose the same?
yes. So firstly, delete your endpoints. When you're trying a
Okay, okay,
geographic routing methodology, delete your endpoints, change the
okay, sir.
configuration to geographic, then add your
Mm-hmm.
endpoints back again. When you're adding your endpoints back again, then it will ask you what is the geographic region mapping, that which
Okay, sir.
region customers should go to which endpoint out there such. So for geographic, you'll
Uh,
have to delete the endpoints and recreate it back again.
we cannot switch from here to there, right, sir? Once, for example,
Uh,
once we are in primary or weighted, we cannot switch into directly into the geography. We have to delete that
yes,
and we have to add.
yes.
And while mapping that, sir, there is some, sorry, what are the, sorry, how to select that region grouping, sir? I mean, so same the regions which are we created for web app services is there, na? Web services. Same should we select or we can select any region there
You can select any
while
region,
mapping?
but it is, yeah, you can select any region, but it is always a preference to select the same region wherever
Okay,
your
what
web
are
is
the,
there. Yes,
okay, okay, okay. For the same endpoint, same region we have to select it.
yes, correct. It's a best practice.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
And sir, what exactly meaning of custom domains? Sir? I'm not
We'll
custom
talk
domains.
about custom domains. We have a separate class for custom domains. We'll talk about that.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. That's about my.
Okay, no problem. Anyone? Yes. Any more questions here? Anyone? Any more questions before we get started? Okay. Did everyone practice traffic managers, guys? Did you all try weighted, geographic? Yes. Priority, performance? Yes. Yes. Now, in an interview, they are going to ask you all these things on what are the different, let's say, routing methodologies that you are aware of about in a traffic manager. What will happen if it's in priority? What will happen if it's in performance? Best, let's say, routing methodologies that you can suggest out here as such. So please have a look at it, and please let me know if there are any questions out there as such. And in today's session, we will move into our next leg of our lectures. which is Azure DevOps. So until now, we've been looking at, let's say, Azure Cloud. Now we need to understand what Azure DevOps really is and how is it connected to, let's say, something like an Azure Cloud out here, in order to understand the complete CI/CD workflow out here as such. Now let's forget about sorry, let's forget about Azure DevOps. Let's only focus upon the terminology called DevOps. Let's see what Azure DevOps is at a later point in time. But let's say what really DevOps is out here as such. Now, anyone, any inputs here on what do you understand by what DevOps is? A combination of development and operations, yes. But what does it really mean for us when it's a combination of development plus operations? Why should it be a combination of development and operations? Or what do you think is the underlying, let's say, importance of DevOps out here in an organization? Anyone?
It will easy the deployment process.
Okay, it will ease the deployment process. Okay. Yes. Anyone else? Any inputs? It will reduce. Sorry. It will reduce the flow of production in software. Okay. Flow of production. Okay. At a time, a single person can do both the development and operations. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Anyone? Any more inputs here?
It resolves the conflicts,
It resolves the conflicts between what? When you say conflict,
environments.
okay, environments. Resolves the conflicts between environments. Okay, good point. Yes, resolves conflicts between environments. Let's talk about that. So before we move into DevOps, let's understand how things were before DevOps came into picture. What were, or let's say, in a very high level overview, let's understand something called as a SDLC. Does anyone know what is the full form of this one? SDLC? Did anyone
software
hear this
Software
term?
developer life
software
cycle.
development life
Software
cycle.
Exactly.
development life cycle.
Software development life cycle.
Life.
So it's called software development life cycle. Very simple. If you want to develop a software, what are all the stages it should go through? Or what are all the stages in a software development life cycle? That's it. You are preparing a software today. Let's say today is day one of software development. Day one till the day, let's say, end. What is, or day one to the day go live? We say it is go live. Go live is nothing but giving your software to a client or giving the application to a client out here. So let's say that you are working on a software called Ola. Let's say something like this, very simple application called Ola. And and what I have is that firstly, I have a company. I represent this company with the company's director. Let's say this is the company's director called. He's the director of Ola. Okay. Now let's imagine that this particular company's director has an idea to start an application called Ola, using which customers can download an app on their phone and they can just click on a button. They can book a cab, and if they can book a cab, right, they can see where the cab is. They can see what is the driver's number and etc. Which makes it very easier and all these things out. So which makes things out very easier out here as such. So he has the idea to go ahead and book, or he has the idea to go ahead and let's just start the application called Ola. But this particular person who's starting a business, he's purely a businessman. He doesn't know how to write a code, or he doesn't know how to develop the application. He doesn't know all these things out. So what will he do? He will start approaching different companies. So let's say he'll start approaching different companies out here. Let's say that he has approached the sales team of a company called Microsoft. Let's say there is a company called Microsoft. So I'll say sales team. In short, I'll say MS for Microsoft out here. So he's approaching the sales team of a company called Microsoft, and he's telling that, you know what, uh, I have like about 1 year. I want this application to be, let's say, going live in about 12 months. This is the timeline that I have. can you develop an application for me? Can you help me develop and deliver and also maintain an application for me? Because I am only considered about the business side of things, on how should I market my product, how should I, let's say, do all these things, but I do not know how to develop, or I do not know how to maintain all these things out here as such. So Microsoft says, okay, fine, don't worry, we have a team, let me go and have a word. And what Microsoft sales team does is that they send out an email to their internal, let's say, technical managers or project managers, and they say, you know what, we have a project like this called Ola. Is anyone interested, or can anyone take this up? That's where your project manager comes into picture. So you have a project manager who's technically very sound, out here, who knows how to, or who's delivered a lot of projects, and he works with the sales team, and he also is in touch with your client. This will become, Ola will now become your end client. The Ola business will now become the end client. And this particular project manager, right, he starts working with the client, and he asks the client different questions. Questions like, very simple questions like, for example, what is the color of your application? Now, how do you want your application to look like? Do you have a logo for your application? Those are the initial questions. And then later comes the technical questions like, for example, who are the users of your application? Let's say, are the users is every user present in India, or do you want to also sell your application to abroad market, like a different country? Depending upon that, this particular project manager will have to design the application in English, Hindi, Telugu, and everything, depending on the languages and all these things. So he's understanding all these things, and then after the initial phase is done, now the initial phase, right, of understanding all these things, on what is the application, what is the logo, what is the end user, what are the features of the application, very importantly, meaning, is the application only intended for cab booking? Do you also want bikes? Do you also want autos? Do you also want food? Do you also want flight bookings? Do you want this application to be multi-purpose application? What is it? After this is done, the initial phase right now is called as a requirement capturing phase. Meaning, very initially, you're trying to understand what is the requirements out here, on what kind of, let's say, is the demand from this particular customer or demand from this particular client. And understanding all these things will take around, let's say, 1 to 1.5 months. I'll give a very wide number, telling it is 1.5 months. Very first phase. Plus, it takes a lot of meetings with the client. Budget is something that we have to discuss on what's the client budget and the timelines and all these things out. Depending upon that, finally they say, okay, fine, you know what, 12 months is our deadline to deliver the software. 1.5 months is done already for the requirement capturing out here. Second thing, the project manager now tells, okay, fine, you know what, the requirement capturing is done. I understood what the application needs to develop, how the application needs to be developed. And now he tells that, okay, fine, I now need to form a team of developers who are expertise in a language. Like, so let's say, for example, uh, just a second, okay, fine. Let's say, for example, I want to develop this application in a language called, just a second. Okay. I want to develop this application in a language called Java or .NET or Python. So this particular project manager will now start looking for people who know that particular language called Python or .NET and all these things. So the second phase is forming a team of developers who know how to develop this application, who know, let's say, what to do with this application, etc. And the project manager initially has a meeting with this particular developers, understands what they want, understands what are all the things that they need. Developers tell, you know what, since it's a Java application we need to develop, it would be good to have a laptop in with, let's say, Linux operating system installed on it, with some softwares installed on it. So can you please help us with this particular laptops and etc. So this project manager has a word with the sales team, has a word internally and etc. Gets the required laptops and etc. Have them installed with, let's say, Linux softwares and everything, and gets the development team ready. So laptop, go ahead and give them some laptops out here. Let's say that all these developers are working on operating systems called Linux. I have given them a Linux operating system laptop out here as such. Again, to hire all the developers to form this team, and also one more important team that I want to introduce right now is a quality analysis team, QA or testers, meaning whatever the code that the developer is starting to write, the tester have to test it out. So I'll also get in the testing team, and the tester also needs a laptop. And let's say the tester is asking for a laptop with a Windows operating system. Windows. Something like a Windows operating system out here as such. Now they start working. They say, okay, fine, we'll start to work on this project. And again, this phase, right? To recruit, to give the laptops, to have everything configured. Let's say that this takes about 1 month. Let's say this particular phase takes about 1 month. So what I'll do is that here in the initial number, I'll say it is 2.5 months. Requirement capturing plus the laptops and all these things. So, guys, can you please go on mute if you're not speaking? I see a couple of people who are unmuted. Please go on mute if you do not have a question. So 2.5 months is already gone. Now you have around 9.5 months in order to, let's say, build and deliver this particular software, and this, let's say, development starts. What will the developers do is that the developers will understand what are all the features that are there. For example, let's say the features are, I need something like cab booking, and even in cab bookings, right, there are multiple features like I need a mini, micro, SUV, all these things, different kind of cabs. Also, autos, bikes, and food delivery. Probably they want food, flight booking, and all these things. These are all the items that I need to work on. These are all the functionalities that I need to work on. So what this development team will do is that they'll start working on one of the other functionality. They'll say, okay, fine, let me start working initially on cab booking. Initially, I'll start working on cab booking, and inside the cab booking also, I have multiple things like, let's say, mini, micro, SUV, and all these things. So each and everything is a feature. Each and everything, let's say, needs to have its own pricing, needs to have its own segment, and all that stuff, right? So they'll start with this, and they'll say, okay, okay, fine, give us like about 1 month to develop the initial code. To develop the initial code out here, that will help you in, let's say, booking some cabs out here, some basic cabs out here. 1 month out here time is what I've asked, or 1 month of time is what the developers asked. So the developers start working. They said, okay, fine, 1 month is the time we have. They started to, let's say, develop this application, build this application, and so on and so forth. And after 1 month, they are now sending this application to what? The testing team. Exactly. Let's say this is the development. Let's say this is the testing team right now. When they are sending it? After 1 month. So what is happening? 3.5 months is already done. Let's say I'll put it for ease of calculation. I'll say it is 4 months because of holidays and everything. 4 months, I'll say. So let's put this as 1.5 month here. So this becomes 4 month out here. 8 months is now left. Now the developer takes, or the tester now takes the entire product and now tests it out completely. They use different tools like Selenium, APM. There are multiple testing tools out there. So they'll use all these tools that are installed on their machines. Let's say they took about 1 month. Let's say the software is very huge. I'm giving an ideal number because it's easy for me to calculate it. I'm giving an ideal number out here. So they're testing it out, and at the end of the testing, they understood that the product is not completely, let's say, bug free, or the product is not completely good. There are issues, or the other way to call an issue is a bug. So they'll say, you know what, there are a lot of bugs out here in the product, and the testing team will say, you know what, developers, I have observed some issues. The software that you developed is not really working on my computer. I'm trying to test it. There are some functionalities which are working on my computer. Can you please adjust those functionalities and send it across to me? The developer says, you know what, the software was actually working fine on my computer. The segments that you are telling, the pieces of software that you're telling which are not working on your computer is working on my computer. And this developer will ask the tester that, are you testing this on a Linux operating system? Because we have developed this on a Linux operating system. It best works on a Linux. Are you testing it on a Linux or are you testing it on Windows? Tester will of course say, you know what, I only know Windows. This is what I'm testing on. Your code should be operating system independent, meaning whatever operating system you built it on, it should be tested or it should be running on anything out there. So please again rectify this out and send it to me. These things will keep happening. Now the developers will say, okay, fine, not a problem. Let me identify what are all the issues. Let me try to fix those particular issues out here. And let's say that the developer is taking around 15 days more to fix that particular issues. So this will become what? 2 months, because 1.5 months plus 15 days for the second time. And after that particular 15 days, they send the software across to the testing team once again. Testing team says, okay, fine, let me take one more, let's say 15 days out here. So 1.5 months and test this out. See how it works out. So now let's see. You have 2.5 months here, you have 2 months here, 4.5 months is already done. 6 months is already done. You have what? 6 months to deliver this particular piece of software. But again, if you see, it's only cab booking. Only one feature took about 6 months of development. I have autos, bikes, food, everything now has to be tested within the next, or developed and tested within the next 6 months period out here. Again, when the cab booking is done, autos come into picture. They start developing this out again, 1 month period of time for initial testing again. Oh, sorry, initial development again, 1 month for initial testing. Same issues again. The developer tells that, you know what, it's working on Linux. The tester tells it's not working on Windows. A lot of issues, a lot of, let's say, pushbacks and etc. And finally, let's say that at the end of, let's say, 10 months, let's say it all took about 10 months out here to completely develop all these things, cabs, autos, bikes, and etc. So I'll say at the end of the 10th month, I have all my features ready. I have the entire application ready. I am good to deliver this application to the client. I'm telling that, okay, fine, I'll give this application to you. But before that, there will be one more team that will coming into picture. I'll tell, it says, okay, fine, hold on. Before you give it to the client, even this particular team has to test it, because this team has to maintain the application out here. This team is called the operations team. Operations. They'll say, you know what? They'll say to the developer, they'll understand how the application really works. They'll say, okay, fine. What is the, let's say, functionality of the application? How should it work? Tell me. And they will also test this out. So I'll say this is a final testing. And let's say in this case, the operations team is using a laptop with Mac operating system on it. You can consider all the you can consider all the possibilities. Let's say they're using Apple laptops with Mac operating systems on top of it. They are now testing with their Mac operating systems on a software which is developed on Linux, again tested on Windows. Now, this team will initially take like about 1 month to test the entire software, to see what is there and to, do all these things out. Let's say I'm giving a very big number, telling 1 month. Considering everything, I'm telling 1 month out here to test this out, to understand how it works out and etc. And if they don't find any issues, you can send it to the client. If they find any issues, again they have to come back to the development team. The process again has to start. Development team has to fix that issues, testing team has to test it out, operations team again has to test it out, and finally the client comes into picture. Yes, the client also, if the client has a technical team of its own, the client also can check the issues. The client also can check the issues out here. But again, if you see, it's taking a lot of time for each and every testing out there. Every time there is an issue, I have to come back to the development team. I'll have to fix that issue again, send it across to the testing team, test it out, and so on and so forth, and etc. There are a couple of issues in this entire software development life cycle. What are those issues? Firstly, see, the project manager is coming in the very first place. After that, there is no interaction within the project manager and the entire team. The reason being, see, one project manager has a lot of projects under him. It's just not one project under one project manager. He'll have multiple projects under, let's say, a project manager out here. So the project manager doesn't, let's say, understand what the developers are really doing on a regular basis. This is the first issue. Second is that when is the testing team coming into picture? After 1 or 1.5 month of development is done, only then I'm sending it across to the testing team, and that's the reason the testing team is taking a lot of time. So there is no coordination between the testing and the development team, because initially they're developing everything. After then they are asking the testing team to test it out. Until then, the testing team doesn't even know what the development team is actually doing. For 1.5 months, they do not even know what they're doing. Finally, the operations team is coming after 10 months, and they're now seeing the product right now for the very first time, and they're testing it again. Reason being, they're taking 1 month of time to test it out. Again, there is an issue between development team and the operations team, or development and the, let's say, testing team, and etc. So there is no proper coordination between multiple teams out here. Issue one. Second issue is that the laptops what each and every team is using. See, my software is being developed on an application, or my software is being developed on an operating system called Linux. It's being tested on something like Windows. Final testing is happening on Mac. See, when the software is developed, right, the operating system on which it is developed heavily influences the quality of the software. Meaning, if the software is meant to be on Linux, it will best run on Linux. If you take that software, test it on Windows, you might not get the best result. You might not really get the best result out there. So this is an issue. But again, I cannot ask everyone to use Linux, because the tester might not even know what is the basics of Linux. The operations team will not even know what is Windows. It could be possible. It could be, multiple possibilities out here as such. So these are the two issues basically what I identify with this, and also the timeline on which I need to deliver the software. See, to deliver a software, I cannot be taking 12 months in 2022. In 2022, I cannot ask, what, give me 12 months and I'll deliver this out. No, it is not possible. And if you see, right, the model of the software development is flowing from the project manager, meaning the project manager is giving work to the developer is giving, send it across to the tester is sending across to the operations. It's a linear flow from, let's say, top to bottom. So it's coming from one to, let's say, down out there. Since it's coming from top to bottom, right, this model of software development was called as a waterfall model. It's a waterfall model of software development out here. So I'll name this as a waterfall model out here as such. Mhm. See, no matter how many things you provide, your software that is developed on, let's say, a Linux operating system will not work perfectly on a Windows, because your operating system heavily influence it out. In most of the preference, there is no preference as such. Wherever it works fine, wherever it works fine, you can run it on top of it. Some versions of softwares like Java will not work on Windows. Will only work on Linux. So you do not have an option. Python works on, let's say, Linux again. So it depends upon what kind of a version that you're developing and what kind of software that you're, let's say, provisioning out here as such. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Okay, so this was waterfall model of development, which used to take a lot of time and which has a lot of issues. And that's the reason this was replaced by a model of development called agile methodology. Model of software development. Agile. Instead of waterfall, I'm just copying the same diagram. I'm saying agile. Reason being, a lot of things remains the same, but now same thing requirement capturing does and all that stuff. But now I'm telling that, what, not 12 months, give me 3 months. Not 12 months, just give me 3 months. Initial phase I'll take about 1 month. I have 2 more months for development. Now I'm telling the client that, what, I cannot give you all these features at one go. I won't give you everything at one go. Tell me what is the essential feature for you, for your application to work. Forget about autos, forget about bikes, forget about food. These are all features which are good to have. But the main feature is what? Cab booking. I will give you the cab booking in 3 months. I'll give you the same cab booking feature in 3 months. Now you will have one more team member who will come into picture in agile model, especially called as a scrum master. Called as what? A scrum master out here. Now the reason scrum master is here, or the reason you have a scrum master here, is because this particular scrum master will have a regular interaction with the project manager. The project manager will have a regular interaction with the client, and all the feedback from the client is passed to the scrum master, and the scrum master has regular calls with the developers and the testers. Has regular calls with the developers and the testers out there, and there is now an effective coordination between the project manager and the developers, testers, and etc. via the scrum master. So scrum master is coming into picture right now, telling that okay, fine, this is what it is and all that stuff. The operating system is still Linux. The operating system is still Linux out here, and the scrum master also does one more thing. You have cab bookings. Even in the cab bookings, you have small features called mini, micro, SUV, and etc. He divides those features amongst the developers. So let's say the first developer will be working on a feature called mini. Second developer will be working on a feature called micro. Third developer will be working on a feature called SUV. Multiple things. And each and every feature, right? They're calling them as, let's say, micro SUVs and etc. In a very technical terminology, we call it as a user story. A user story out here. User story, user story 1. And the feature here that I'm working on is called cab booking. Cab booking is the main feature under which you have multiple user stories out here, meaning that particular feature called cab booking is divided into multiple user stories called micro, mini, SUVs, and so on, and it is divided amongst the developers. Now the Scrum Master tells you that, you know what, we will have to develop all these things in one sprint. There is something called sprints which come into picture. A sprint means nothing but in a software industry, a sprint here means somewhere around 2 weeks to 4 weeks period. 2 weeks to 4 weeks forms your one sprint. At the end of a sprint, these are all the features that are delivered. Let's say that my sprint is about 4 weeks, 1 month. So one sprint is about 1 month out here as such. And at the end of each and every day, whatever user story that the developers are working has to be tested by the tester. Not at the end of the development, but as and when the development is going on, the testing team also needs to be involved here. This is called as development oriented testing, or sorry, testing oriented development, the other way around. Meaning each and every day, the tester will send feedback across to the developers, and on the next day, the developer, the scrum master, and also the testers, they get into a common call, discuss what we have done yesterday, what are the issues there, what should we do today, and what is the goal for tomorrow. And on a higher level, what is the goal for our sprint. They will have a call every day, and this is called as a scrum call, or we also call them as a daily stand-up call, or daily stand-up meetings, or the, let's say, scrum call out here is what we can call it. So in a daily stand-up meeting, in a scrum call, what is happening or what will happen? Very simple. All the team members will, let's say, come into a common call, and they'll discuss about what they have done yesterday, what are the issues that the testers identified, how can we resolve this particular issue, and what all, let's say, are the features, or what all, let's say, is the issues and all that stuff is what they're going to, let's say, discuss upon out here as such. So this is what they're going to work on, and this is how the, let's say, the development is happening right now. And now I do not have, let's say, about, I do not need to, let's say, work for about 2 or 3 months. I just need to work for about one sprint, 1 month, develop these features, send it across to the operations team out here. Sorry, send it across to the operations team out here, telling that, okay, fine, please go ahead, test it out. Please go ahead, see what are the issues. Once the operation teams gives a green light, it will go to your client. And what the client will see right now is that the client will now have, let's say, options to go ahead and start booking cabs like mini, micro, and all these things out here as such. So now the client will have now the option at his end to go ahead and book those cabs with that particular features out here as such. But again, this will address the coordination issue, meaning now the development, the QA, and the operations team working together. They're working in a coordinated manner, but they still have this issue. Development team has Linux operating system still. QA team has, let's say, a Windows operating system still. Operations has Mac still. They have all these things out here, and that's where DevOps as a practice comes into picture. DevOps as a practice comes into picture to address two things. One, the coordination issue in an agile process. Two is the incompatibility on the operating systems out here. Meaning you have so many operating system softwares being developed on one platform, tested on one platform, delivered on one platform. Don't do that. Let's standardize it out. Let's standardize the software development lifecycle. Standardizing SDLC. What do I mean by standardizing the software development lifecycle is this. Let's see from a for a Scrum Master perspective. From a Scrum Master's perspective, what the Scrum Master needs to do? Planning, telling what are all the team members which are available in this particular sprint, how many of them are leaves or on leaves, how many leaves are there in the sprint, what is the delivery that we can promise on, what are all the things that we can plan. So they need a tool to plan. They need some kind of a tool to plan out here. That's where something called Azure boards come into picture. Boards, or in an open source world, if you are coming from an open source, you can call this as Jira, to plan your work, to see how the progress is going across and etc. And we can also call them as boards out here as such. We call these as Azure boards. For effective planning, which can be used by the Scrum Master. Used by Scrum Masters out here. For the development team writes a lot of code on a daily basis. They have a lot of code. They, let's say, program a lot of things. Now the question for the development team is, where should I store the code? Should I store the code in my local system? You can, but what will happen if your local system crashes? Your entire code will vanish. What if this developer leaves the organization? The entire code is vanished. Now I am telling that please don't store your code on your local system. Store your code on a central location in the cloud, which is called as a repository. Repositories out here like Git, or I'd say GitHub, something called GitHub Enterprise, something called as Azure Repos. This is used, or this is the service which is used to store the code. Whatever the code, whatever, let's say, the program the developers are writing, or whatever ARM templates that you are writing, whatever Terraforms that you're writing, whatever PowerShell that you're writing, should be stored inside the repository service out here as such. Let's come back, address this issue. The developer is writing the code and he's also developing the code. There are two things that are happening here: writing the code and development of the code. Development of the code meaning very simple, code build phase. What do you mean by code build, guys? Did we see what is build? Do we know what is
And
a
what is
code
high
build?
level?
converting high-level code to the machine. I mean, say that understanding languages like binary.
Uh, I'm sorry. Yes, but the binary exactly. So whatever code is there, to convert it into a binary language from a high level language to a low level language is called as a build. The issue is that if you build directly on your operating system, the code is very much influenced by the flavor of the operating system out here. Meaning the code takes the flavor, or the binaries take the flavor of the operating system, making it very difficult to run on a different platform out here. Now I'm telling, store the code here. What kind of a code? Raw code, and build it using something called as CI/CD pipelines. Meaning, build the code on the cloud. Don't build it on your local system. So that's where pipelines as a concept comes into picture. Pipelines. Again, here we can be using multiple things like Jenkins as a pipeline, Nevercode, Buddy Build. There are a lot of things out here. TeamCity, Nevercode, Buddy Build, and etc. And this is where I'll get in a service called Azure Pipeline Service. Build and release services out here. This is to build and deploy your code. Now, as a tester and the operations team, I would like to test the code. I would like to see how the code really works. I would like to test this out. For which Azure gives you, okay, sorry, for which, let's say DevOps, for which Azure gives you something called as test plans, wherein your operations team and your testing team can get their test plans out here in the cloud, and they can test your code on the cloud only, not to use their local machines. They'll write the test cases, but they're not executing the test cases. Test cases are to be executed on the cloud. Just to be executed on the cloud using this particular service called test cases out here. Now you need a team who can understand all these services, and all these services, right, that you see, which is Azure DevOps, Azure boards, Azure repositories, pipelines, test plans, and etc. They come under a bigger service called as Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps now becomes a product. Azure DevOps now becomes a product under which you'll find all these services out here, and you need a team to understand all these services, and that's where a DevOps team comes into picture. As a DevOps team, you are expected to understand Azure DevOps, which is boards, repositories, Azure pipelines, test plan to an extent, not really, let's say, mandate out there for us. Pipelines, repositories, boards are the three services that we are expected to master. And in a pipeline, right, I'm telling build and deploy your code. When I'm saying deploy your code, where will you deploy the code? Where are you deploying the code? When you say deploy, where do you want to deploy?
Web apps.
Server.
Web apps, virtual machines, meaning deploying your code to a cloud. And that's where Azure as a cloud comes into picture. So you as a DevOps engineer, so that's the reason, right? We first understood Azure cloud from an administration perspective. Now we understand DevOps tool from a DevOps perspective. We combine both, and that's where we give you something like Azure DevOps out there. So Azure DevOps meaning both Azure cloud and let's say the DevOps part of it, combining together, you get the holistic knowledge of build development and also the administration side of things. Till now, we've been looking at administration side of things, like how do you build your services. Now we take the same concept and we say how do you build your services using Azure DevOps, not just like a simple, let's say, development procedure. How do you build your services using Azure DevOps out here? What do we do with the DevOps, let's say, practice out here, and so on and so forth out here, such. So this is where we come down, and this is where we answer those questions on what DevOps is, how do you build the services, and all these things out here as such. And we will be heavily using a tool called Azure DevOps from here. Again, Azure DevOps is a software as a service, a SaaS solution, which means you don't have to install anything. You just have to go to this link called dev.azure.com. Until now, being going to something called as what? Portal.azure.com. From now, we'll be going into this particular service called dev.azure.com. Again, if you see this, it's selling Azure boards, pipelines, repositories, plans, extensions, and all these things. So these are all, let's say, the services that we are going to look at. And today I just wanted to be an introduction. And from tomorrow, we'll be starting with something called as repositories. This is the first service that we'll be starting, which is called repositories out here. So before starting repositories, I'll also show you how to create an account with Azure DevOps. What all do you need to create an account with Azure DevOps? What should you be doing after you create an account with Azure DevOps? And how should we get started with, let's say, Azure DevOps out here as such. So the first half of tomorrow's session will be on, let's say, how do you get started with Azure DevOps? And after that, we'll be looking at what is a service called as Azure Repos or Git in the background out here as such. Is there any questions that I can take till you?
Sir, operation team is nothing but business people or any other team.
I'm sorry, can you please come again? Operations team is nothing but?
Business people or is there any other team
Yes.
members?
You can call them as business. They are business side of, let's say, your application. Meaning they stay regular touch with your client. Sometimes your operations team can also be your client. So yes, operations is nothing but the business side of things.
Okay, thank
Operation is it the people in the management field?
I'm sorry, can you come again, please?
Operation is working under the management team, right? Like what the
Operations is
DevOps.
working. Mhm. See,
Yes.
operations
So
is the business side of things, meaning yes, they come under the management. Yes, they kind of, let's say, do the they do the, let's say, overview, or they do the management out here as such. Yes, you can tell that yes, they come under the management out here as such. Yes, by the end of this course, can you apply for administration, or can you apply for, let's say, DevOps? Again, if you plan to give your own interviews, I would say please roll out your resume as Azure DevOps engineer only. There is not a lot of scope for administration today. There is not a lot of scope for administration. Again, if you go into administration, you'll have to again see how you can move into DevOps. So not a lot of scope for administration. So try DevOps only. Again, one quick, let's say, suggestion that I want to give you all is that if you plan to roll out your resumes and if you want to give your own interviews, you can start after 1.5 week from now. After 1.5 week from now, we'll be understanding what DevOps is and all these things. You can start to, let's say, roll out your resumes. If you plan to take the help from institution, for the interview help from the institution out here, you can start rolling out your resumes from today itself. You can start doing that from today. You can ask the institution for some resume samples. You can send out the resumes back to me. I'll review those resumes. I already have a couple of resumes to review, so I'll review those resumes, send my feedback across. Then you can start applying your resumes in portals like Naukri, Monster, and etc. And it will take some time for the interviews to get scheduled, and parallelly the classes will be going on right now. So up to you. If you want to give the interviews, please go ahead, look at the questions out here. Administration, you are good to give it right now. So if you are just looking for an administration profile, you're good to give it right now. But my suggestion is don't go for administration profile. Try to go for a DevOps profile. It would be beneficial for your career. So once you move into the DevOps, let's say once you want to go into the DevOps profile, and if you want to give your own interviews, try your own interviews, just give like about 1.5 week out here. After then you start your resume process. But if you are taking help from the institute, you can start it right today. Okay. Yes. Any more questions, guys?
So which email do we need forward?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to understand your question. Can you come again, please?
Yeah, could you so that we can forward the institution?
Your voice is breaking, ma'am. I'm not able to get you.
Email ID, please.
Please type in your question. I can take that.
Sir, what is sprint actually, sir? You said sprint, right?
Sprint is nothing but a development life cycle. Sprint is nothing but a simple development cycle out here, which is nothing comprises about 2 to 4 weeks of development and testing.
Uh, okay, approximately 1 month. Okay.
Sir, as a DevOps engineer, do we learn Python, any programming language like Python or Java?
No, you don't have to. You don't really need to, let's say, have an understanding of programming language. Scripting, which is PowerShell, that's good enough.
So this GitHub is only used for storing the like it's used as a repository. Only we are going to store some codes or data into that.
Predominantly, yes. That is to store your code, not only to store your code, to version your code. There's something called version control, which we'll look at on what is a version control and etc. But right now, on today's date, GitHub is also being used as a CI/CD pipeline platform. So companies are also using GitHub for doing CI/CDs also. But yes, we in these lectures, we in these, let's say, segments will be using not GitHub, but something called as Azure repositories. We'll talk about that on what is the difference and etc. To store our code and to version control our code.
Okay.
Is any more questions, guys?
Sir, in future, if you want to move from the DevOps engineer to administrator, is it possible to move from here to there?
Yes, it is possible to move from administration into DevOps. Again, if you initially go as administrator, try to move into DevOps. Again, it will take you somewhere around 1.5 to 2 years in order to, let's say, move your profile. Meaning, in a same company, if you're trying, let's say, to go as an administrator first and then move into DevOps, it'll take some time. So that's the reason I was telling it is better. It is suggested directly to go into DevOps after your research.
Okay, sir.
So, can we apply
Mhm.
for Azure Architect?
Azure Architect, no, you won't be able to apply for Azure Architect directly because we are not really targeting towards architecture. Architecture for you to be an architecture, you also need to know a little bit about development, a little bit about a lot of things out there. So architecture, I wouldn't, let's say, suggest out there. That's the profile I wouldn't suggest.
So, as of now, we can only apply to Azure Administrator.
Administration, yes. After 2 weeks from now, you can apply for DevOps as well.
Oh,
So now we are not eligible for use apply for DevOps.
You are not. It's not like about your eligibility. You are already learning DevOps out there. The course is itself for DevOps. But if you want to give your own interviews, that's the criteria. If you want to give your own interviews, take 1.5 week and then apply for DevOps. But I want everyone to apply for DevOps only.
Okay.
Sir, is
Sir,
there any
for
certification we need for DevOps engineer?
I'm sorry. Can you come again, please?
Is there any certification required for DevOps engineer? Like
There is
we
a
have
certificate.
a AZ900 in Azure, right?
Yes.
So is there any
Yes.
certificate for this?
So for Azure, the certifications are AZ900 and AZ104, which is fundamentals and Azure administration. For DevOps, it is called AZ400, certified Azure DevOps engineer. Is it required to crack an interview? No, it's not required to crack an interview. Is it good for your profile? Yes, it will be a value addition for your profile. Not mandatory though. You can do certifications after you go inside a company. Not a problem.
Okay, sir. Can we put AZ900 for DevOps? Is it useful or is not required?
No, AZ900 is only for Azure, not for DevOps. AZ900 is only Azure fundamentals.
Okay, sir. Thank
Sir,
sir,
900,
one small
104,
quick question.
400. Yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Madhu.
Yeah, one small quick question, sir. Sir, in coming to Azure, we've seen storages, right?
Mhm.
Containers, something. We've seen, no?
Yes.
So, what about the rest of the storages, like file shares, queues are there? When are you going to cover that?
See,
Is
file
it
shares,
required or no?
tables, queues, we don't really use it. File share is something that I can take as a lecture. Like file share is something that we would use a little bit of a little bit out there. Containers is something that you heavily use. It's called as a blob storage account. Containers is something that we heavily use out here as such. But
Okay,
yes,
sir.
I can take a lecture on files. Yes.
Okay, okay. Sir, I had something about functional app services, something web app, something in
Okay,
somewhere. So what
functions,
exactly?
Azure functions. We will be looking them from a DevOps perspective. We'll look at that in a DevOps perspective out there. But right now, I'm a little above the hour, so I'll have a next
Okay,
class
thank you, sir.
basically that is waiting.
Okay,
So
okay,
I'll take additional questions in tomorrow's session. Okay.
okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.